In the grand whole of American justice, there are days that go unnoticed, and then there are days that change everything. It began like any other high-profile trial, flashing cameras outside, tight, lipped attorneys inside, and a pair of smug police officers standing tall in the courtroom, confident they'd once again beat the system. Derek Cole and Brent Miller had manipulated the law so many times, the courthouse might as well have been their stage. To them, today was just the final act in another performance where the good guys lost and the bad guys walked free. What no one realized, however, was that justice hadn't abandoned the room, it had simply chosen a new disguise. As the judge prepared to read the verdict, as reporters scribbled and spectators leaned forward, something unusual stirred in the back row. A silent woman in a navy blue suit. Calm, composed, watching, the system was about to face a storm from within, and by the time the gavel dropped, the real trial would only just begin. The celebration before the crash, the air inside courtroom 304 was thick with expectation, but for officers Derek Cole and Brent Miller, it was more like a victory party in disguise. As they stood flanked by their high-powered attorneys, their smug grins said it all. Dressed in sleek suits, oozing undeserved confidence, the two officers barely acknowledged the judge as he read the words they'd been waiting to hear, not guilty on all charges. Brent leaned over to Derek and whispered, "Told you we'd skate through again." Behind them, a handful of uniformed cops clapped under their breath, part of the same poisoned brotherhood. Their lawyers exchanged handshakes. It was a courtroom, yet it felt like a celebration hall. No fear, no guilt, just unshakable pride in their untouchable status. In their minds, this was their final hurdle. After all, they'd beaten charges before. This was just another notch on their belt, a corrupt system bending once again to power, politics, and payoffs. Wolves in uniform behind the polished badges and chestful of commendations, Derek and Brent were predators who had mastered the art of hiding in plain sight. As members of the Metro Narcotics Task Force, they were publicly celebrated as crime-fighting heroes. But behind closed doors, they ruled the streets with fear and manipulation. Innocent people were framed, evidence was planted, warrants forged, and when the truth dared to surface, it was buried under threats or bought silence. The few who tried to stand against them found themselves discredited, demoted, or worse. The department knew, but nobody acted. Internal affairs opened files that mysteriously vanished. Prosecutors turned a blind eye. Even judges hesitated to challenge them. These weren't just bad cops. They were the architects of a silent empire, one that traded justice for control, honor for profit. Their courtroom smirks weren't just confidence. They were taunts, proof that they believed the law could never touch them, but they had no idea who was watching and what was coming. The woman in the shadows, while the courtroom buzzed with murmurs and muffled chuckles, one figure remained utterly still. In the back row, dressed in a modest navy blue suit, sat a woman with sharp eyes and an unreadable expression. She didn't clap, she didn't flinch, she just observed. No one gave her a second glance, which was exactly how she wanted it. She looked like a silent court observer, perhaps a reporter or a family member. But behind that calm demeanor was a razor, sharp mind recording every smirk, every whispered word, every arrogant glance exchanged between the corrupt cops and their legal team. The woman had been to many courtrooms before, but not like this. This one was personal, strategic, designed for something greater than a verdict. She waited with purpose, her fingers brushing the edge of a black leather badge case tucked inside her blazer. The celebration unfolding around her didn't faze her. It only confirmed what she had come to prove, that the rot ran deep. The badge that shook the room just as the judge was about to adjourn, the woman in the navy, blue suit, stood slowly. Her voice was steady, calm, but commanded immediate attention. "Your Honor," she said, "I request a moment before this courtroom is dismissed." The room turned, whispers stopped. Even the smirking officers glanced back, confused. Judge Merrow, puzzled, asked, "And who are you, ma'am?" She stepped forward and pulled out the badge. It wasn't a regular badge. It was gold, gleaming under the lights like a weapon of truth. the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation reflected in the stunned eyes around the room. "I'm Director Eliza Raines, FBI." You could hear a pin drop, then you could hear hearts stop. Derek's smirk vanished. Brent's fingers twitched as if reaching for a weapon he no longer wore. Every inch of their confidence collapsed in real time. Eliza didn't blink. This trial wasn't what it seemed, and neither am I. The courtroom had celebrated too early. Now it was time for the reckoning. A trial meant to test the system. Director Eliza Raines didn't come to stop a courtroom drama. She came to expose the whole theater. Standing confidently before the stunned judge and gasping gallery, she laid it bare. The trial everyone had just witnessed wasn't about securing a guilty verdict. It was bait, a trap. A field test designed by the FBI to observe how deeply the corruption had spread within the justice system. "For months, we tracked everything," she said, eyes sweeping the courtroom. "Leaked evidence, paid off jurors, silent judges, and crooked prosecutors. We had to let this play out to know how far it reached. This was never about just two dirty cops. It was about the network that protected them, the courtroom that celebrated their lies, the attorneys who enabled them, and the system that failed its citizens." Gasps filled the room. The celebration turned to silence. What they thought was the end of a trial was merely the beginning of an investigation far bigger than anyone imagined. The courtroom rayed Eliza to Rhodes. "Proceed." With that simple command, the courtroom doors burst open. 5 federal agents stormed in vests tight, eyes focused, weapons holstered but ready. The federal seal on their uniforms silenced the room faster than any gavel. "You are both under arrest," Agent Rhodes declared, approaching Derek and Brent, "for obstruction of justice, conspiracy, racketeering, and abuse of power under federal law." The officers who had been celebrating minutes ago were now pale shadows of themselves. Derek tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Brent stepped back, but agents closed in. Their defense attorneys froze, helpless. The judge gripped the edge of his bench. Eliza didn't flinch. "You thought you were untouchable," she said coldly. "You were simply under surveillance." As handcuffs clicked shut, the silence wasn't just shock. It was a collective realization that justice hadn't failed. It had waited for the perfect moment to strike. The web of corruption unravels as the agents cuffed the disgraced officers. Eliza turned her sharp gaze toward the bench. "Your Honor," she began, "you may want to vacate your seat." Judge Merrow blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "The FBI has uncovered evidence that links members of this court, including staff, clerks, and legal counsels, to a long-running chain of bribes and judicial manipulation," she said. "You'll find a sealed subpoena on your desk shortly. Consider this court compromised." The gasps this time were louder. A clerk stumbled backward. One juror looked ready to faint. It wasn't just 2 cops on trial anymore. It was the entire judicial ecosystem that had failed its people. Eliza didn't shout. She didn't need to. Every word was a strike, every pause a silent warning. The gallery sat frozen, watching as the courtroom became the very crime scene it had once pretended to clean. The system had fed itself for years, but today it was coughing up rot. The verdict that never mattered. Derek and Brent had grinned when the judge announced not guilty. But now, standing shackled with fear in their eyes, that verdict meant nothing. Eliza stepped closer and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "The charges you were just acquitted of, they were never the real case." The officers stared, confused. "What? We let the verdict happen," she said, "to track who celebrated, who paid, who leaked information. But your true crimes, your trafficking of stolen property, your manipulation of federal raids, your involvement in impersonating federal agents, those are just now being unsealed." A second set of files hit the prosecutor's table, evidence too powerful to hide, too explosive to deny. "You never beat the system," Eliza said, voice sharp as a blade. "You only danced long enough for us to tighten the noose." The courtroom had applauded injustice minutes ago. Now it sat trembling at the feet of real justice, one that played the long game, and one, when silence turns to shock the courtroom, once buzzing with smug laughter and whispered boasts, now sat under a suffocating silence. No one dared move. The very walls that had echoed with false justice now felt like they were closing in. Jurors who had confidently delivered a not guilty verdict moments ago stared in disbelief. One woman clutched her chest, realizing she may have played a part in freeing men who were never truly on trial. Another whispered they knew everything. The prosecutor's face, once resigned and weary, now showed the flicker of vindication. Defense attorneys, once cocky, now avoided eye contact with everyone, especially Eliza Raines. The power dynamic in the room had reversed completely. This wasn't just a legal ambush, it was poetic justice, delivered with precision. And as the reality sank in, those present understood they hadn't witnessed a courtroom victory. They had witnessed a takedown, one that would ripple through the system for years to come. Justice doesn't knock, it breaks down doors. Eliza didn't wait for applause. She didn't offer closing remarks or a dramatic exit line. She simply turned toward the doors and began walking out, her badge now tucked away. Her presence still felt like thunder. But before she left, she offered one final truth. Justice doesn't beg for permission. It doesn't knock politely when needed. It breaks down doors. With that, she disappeared through the same doors the agents had entered, leaving behind a courtroom in ruins, not of bricks, but of illusions. By nightfall, headlines screamed across the nation. FBI director crashes courtroom, arrests corrupt cops, and exposes judicial ring. The task force was dismantled, indictments were issued, dozens of past cases were reopened. And those who once laughed in the face of justice now sat in cold, silent cells. Eliza Raines had walked in as a stranger. She walked out as a legend, and every crooked cop in the country learned the same thing that day. You never know who's watching. By sundown, courtroom 304 was empty, but its echoes lingered. The smirks had faded, the arrogance dissolved. The symbols of power, the uniforms, the bench, the badges had all been redefined. And in the center of it all stood a woman who never raised her voice but made the nation tremble with just a name, Eliza Raines, director of the FBI. She hadn't just exposed corruption, she'd weaponized patience, silence, and precision. She let the guilty cheer, only so she could make the fall more permanent. In doing so, she reminded every citizen, every juror, every lawman that justice doesn't always roar when it enters, sometimes it waits. And then strikes like lightning, because on that unforgettable day, when corrupt cops celebrated in court, they didn't realize their greatest mistake wasn't the crimes they committed. It was doing them in front of the woman they never saw coming. And that was the day the badge spoke louder than the verdict.